G'day, how's everybody doing? All right, I'm coming down here. I'm not going to stand up there. And I'm going to probably have Tom walking around the audience a little bit because I'm going to do my best to get a conversation going with you guys as opposed to my standing up here and talking at you for 30 minutes or so. But I would tell you that kind of what started this conversation in the ethics committee was a conversation about a challenge that we feel that all practitioners have at one time or another, where you're trying to figure out, how do I balance the public interest, the firm's interest, and the client interest, right? You have those regularly, right? Okay. And when you get a new CPA, the new licensee, how many of you think that that new licensee, by show of hands, is ready to balance those things? Yeah, right, okay. Now the question is, then what are we doing as state boards to help those people along, right? So in trying to go down that path, let me ask a question in terms of, from your own personal growth, your own personal ethical growth. My question for you in the audience: can you relate to your colleagues here one of those experiences you had that you think really made a difference? Come on. Do we have a volunteer? Oh, we got to have a volunteer here, right?
They're a tough crowd.
They're a tough crowd. All right. Keith.
Am I a volunteer?
You're volunteered. You just got volunteered.
I would definitely say the first two partners that I worked with as a brand new student were exemplary business leaders and had a reputation that everybody would like to have. So you just learned right away, if you want to do the right thing and go ahead in this firm, be like them, make sure you're associated with the right clients, and just do the right thing. That had a lasting impression on my career.
Okay. Do I have another volunteer?
All right, we'll use it.
All right.
Yeah. Go ahead. Go with another story.
Now, come on. Tom?
I was going to say the same thing.
Now, come on. Pass it along.
I was going to say this same thing, just in a different way, just mentoring along the way.
Okay. Now, so if mentoring, hang on to this for a moment, right? So if we're saying mentoring makes a difference, right?
Yes.
How often in your firm are you having conversations at the partner level and the manager level about mentoring that ethical behavior?
In the last 2 years, I would say that's probably every other month.
Every other month?
And we've instituted a formal mentoring program that we do every month.
Good for you. Good for you. Anybody here from business and industry want to take this one on? No, you don't. You're saying, I don't want to speak up today. Okay. I want to raise we go back to that triangle again. Public interest, firm interest, client interest. Does the public interest always come first? Show of hands. Public interest always comes first. Okay. So many of you saying no. Can I get a volunteer to say why the public interest might not come first? Come on. Who didn't raise their hand here? Al?
I'm not in public accounting, but from a regulatory standpoint, I think you have to weigh all three. You know.
From a regulatory standpoint,
you have to look at the public interest
and weigh all three. Okay.
But you also have to look at, I think the client I look at as customer too, who your customer is. It could be the public. It could be,
Go ahead.
Could be the
Let
public.
everybody else hear you.
Could be the public, it could be my partner sitting next to me from the Michigan Association.
Right?
So you have to weigh all factors, I think, equally.
Okay, so you're saying weigh them all equally, but public doesn't come slightly ahead of the others.
It depends. I think it really depends on what the situation is. I mean, public always is first, but there may be somebody else right there along with it,
Okay?
with the public.
Tom?
Ray, I think many times it's personal interest comes first.
All right. Now, is that the way, if we're sitting here as regulators, we should be resolving that?
No.
No. Okay.
But I think many times in situations, the person thinks about themselves first rather than the public.
Okay. And we've got...
I also think it's, for us, it's what the statutes and rules state. It's, there is, the public interest may not be in agreement with what the statute states.
That, and I, Bucky, I'm coming your way. Can you pass that down?
I don't necessarily believe that the public's interest and the client's interest are mutually exclusive. I mean, it's an awareness of why you're doing the work that that you have a responsibility to the public who's using the financial statements or the financial information you're preparing. But I mean, certainly I have the relationship with my client. I just don't see them as mutually exclusive.
I think that's well said. And I think a lot of us in our practice, in terms of trying to keep that quality of practice high, understand that the public interest has to go hand in hand with the client interest. And sometimes there's a challenge of bringing your client along to understand that, right? But at the end of the day, that's part of what we do, right? So I think that point's well said. But when I sit and I read some of the things or listen to our speaker the other day from the PCAOB, I think part of the view is the public comes first. I think at the end of the day, from my perspective, the public maybe edges out, should edge out. Right, we're the regulator, right? We're representing the public. But I think Bucky said it very well about how we have to balance. And I think perhaps what first name was Al, was probably, your comment wasn't significantly different than Bucky's if I interpreted it right. Given those comments, what's our approach as state boards for trying to promote ethical behavior? CPE, right? How many of your states have an ethics CPE requirement? Right? Okay? Now, raise your hand again if you think that ethics CPE requirement is doing the job that we just were talking about, trying to get done, right? Yeah, Texas, all right? So Bill, talk about what you think is working in that requirement.
We have been able to track it statistically. And statistically, we've been able to prove that since we implemented mandatory ethics CPE, that our enforcement issues have decreased. So, with an increasing CPA population. So I can forward the graph to be able to demonstrate this empirically.
Okay. Now, what do you think is working right in your ethics CPE that's allowing that to happen?
It's what's working is a constant reminder that one needs to always be working on ethics and to stay up with the latest development in whatever the rules are, in addition to whatever the dilemmas are that CPAs face on an ongoing basis.
Okay. I find that interesting, and at the same time, I find, because I'm not sure I've seen that in my state. And we've had ethics CPE for a fair period of time. We're not as tough as you are, huh? So is it the ethics CPE or is it the tough enforcement? Huh? A combination of both, right? But I'd encourage us to be asking the question: is ethics CPE working? Can we make it more effective? How many of you have state-based rules CPE? Okay. Now the question is that rules focus where we need to be? And you're going to have to answer that one on your own. I would tell you that our state was rules focused for a while. And what's the most common thing that we heard? What do you think the most common thing is that we heard from our licensees about that rules-based CPE? What's the most common comment? Somebody. It's boring, right? It's boring. What else? I heard it before. It's the same as last year, right? Sometimes it's inaccurate. Oh, that one's scary, right? It's too easy, okay? And at the end of the day, the question, is it raising the bar and accomplishing the mission that we want to accomplish? I listened to Bill's comment, and it's about, can we keep people constantly alert? Can we keep them aware? Can we keep them understanding various ethical threats? Versus, well, I had the rules changed a little bit since last year. How did that really advance my understanding of the major threats that I really ought to be concerned about? So, I guess we've gotten into this question about how things match up in terms of, are we doing the best that we can with our rules? In some cases, in our ethics CPE. In some cases, maybe we can. In some cases, maybe we should be thinking about how we promote that better. I've got another question about trends here. As you think about the trends in ethics, are we becoming more rules-based or more principles-based, and why? As you look at the trends in the profession, ethically, more rules-based, more principles-based? And how do you think we're moving? In which direction?
I would certainly hope that we're moving more of a principles-based approach to ethics.
Okay.
And I think what we've seen is, with some of as we've talked about even yesterday, is the failures we've had in financial audits and other transactions where companies and audit firms use minimum standards or minimum rules to get by is not deemed to be acceptable in today's time.
Well said. Bill, you look like you're scratching your...
Well, I'm at risk of contradicting one of my board members.
All right.
But I would venture to say that I think we're stuck on rules-based. And the reason for that is the amount of litigation that one faces in this profession. And principles don't cut it in the courtroom.
I'm theory, he's practice.
Yeah. Coulter says, I'm theory, he's practice, huh? Who else wants to step in on this? John.
I think that the courts and the litigation is one factor, but I also think the public is another factor that's pushing it towards rules-based, because they're saying, show me the rule that says you can do this, or show me the rule that was violated, not where was your decision-making in this process.
And you think the public is pushing that way? When you say the public's lawyer or the public at large? Complainants, all right? Alan.
I think as a profession, we have pushed it toward the rules base because as a profession, we've always wanted a rule. Right. I see this so much in peer review and everything. Well, where's the rule for this? And I think that's where it's keeping us at the rules side instead of us being able to move to the principles side a lot of times.
So can I ask you a follow-up question?
Sure.
if you're thinking about Kentucky, your state, do you think your state, when you look at ethics and the ethical, what you've set up for licensees to follow, primarily rules?
Well, I think we moved more toward rules when a few years ago we moved into the arena that we required ethics CPE.
Okay. Kitty.
Thank you, Ray. I'm teaching a 2-hour session on ethics on Wednesday at a professional presentation. And when I went through the AICPA rules, I'm sorry, we are very rules-based. I can't even cover the independence rules in the 2 hours.
Right.
The theory is great that we should be independents in both appearance and fact, but we have 19 pages of independence rules. And that's what I'm teaching. Boring.
But you're going to make it better than boring, right? There we go, Kitty. You know, and when I was thinking about this question from my own perspective, I would probably say we're probably leaning on the rules-based side. I'd probably argue that we might move, the pendulum's starting to move the other way a little bit, from my own perspective. And I'd probably say what's moving it that direction is the threats and safeguards approach that you're seeing introduced, and we've had it for a while in the independence rules. When I say threats and safeguards approach, how many of you feel like you know what I'm talking about? Okay. Now, this is something that I think is something that we're going to need to be having a conversation about and raising awareness of, because when I look at the AICPA independence rules, they talk about a series of threats and various safeguards you put in place to meet those threats. They talk about self-review threat of reviewing your own work, being a client advocate, adverse interest threat, you and your client having adversarial or adverse interests with each other, the familiarity threat, being too familiar with your client, undue influence threat, financial self-interest threat, okay? And you see these run through the independence rules. The AICPA, the international ethical standards have already done it. The AICPA is preparing a codification project coming our way. And this codification project is going to introduce the threats and safeguards approach, not just to independence, but throughout the AICPA code. Now, part of what my message is today, and I think part of where I'm encouraging us to say we have some homework today, when I raised my hand and said, how many of you are familiar with this threats and safeguards approach, I didn't see a lot of hands go up. I didn't see 80% of the hands go up. I didn't see 50% of the hands go up. Most of you probably have some of your rules referring directly to the AICPA rules, right? And you have some of your own rules in statute, not statute, I'm sorry, in rule, right? I think there's about 3 states out here that actually have ethical rules in statute. Those states are going to be challenging, right? Let's take the low-hanging fruit first. Let's take the most of us that have our rules in rule, right? So kind of what's, left one out there. Kind of what's coming our way is, as you refer to the AICPA code, do you refer to it throughout, to their independence rules only? Do you refer to it for 90% of what you do, or 10%? We're going to see a codification that's going to have a very different look and feel to it. And part of that look and feel is a feel that says, here's rules for members in public practice. Here's how it plays out for members in business and industry. It's a very interesting question about if you're in government, if you're a governmental auditor, you're probably more on the in public practice side. But if you're in government on the accounting side, you're probably more on the business and industry side, right? And you could be straddling the line depending on where you are in government, okay? We're going to see this new codification exposure draft expected April 2013, right? Get the busy season over with, and then we'll all have some real work to do as state boards. But part of what I see coming is this whole threats and safeguards approach, and it's a very different approach to ethical thinking in terms of what's the threat that could impact my practice, my relationship with my client, and what safeguards can I put in place to reduce those threats. And in some cases, the threat is such that there aren't adequate safeguards. But becoming familiar, becoming comfortable with this approach, and trying to think how this is going to fit into your own laws, your own rules, we have some work ahead. And so kind of kind of where I want us leaving today and thinking about today is what's the work that we have ahead. And I think, I've listened to the conversation here at Disney. I've watched the behavior here at Disney. It's about how do we deliver the best, right? How are we always delivering the highest standard? And as Coulter said, it isn't about what's the minimum rule, and I get barely over that. Our challenge is how do we as state boards communicate using the tools that Tom and Jeff were just talking about, perhaps. How do we communicate to our licensees that we always keep that standard as high as we can keep it, right? How do we get that infused into our CPE instead of the boring ethics CPE, right? And how do we carry a message about some potential real rule changes coming ahead for licensees? Because I think the one thing that we should be very thoughtful about is coming ahead. If I set up one set of ethical rules for my licensees in my state, and there's some significant differences between the AICPA code, where do we put our licensees? So as you leave today, I want you thinking about, can we better deliver the ethics CPE? Can we better communicate? And if you can write down 1, 2, 3 ideas about what has to happen next in your state to move ethics forward and to bring it to a higher level. I think already it's fairly high, to be honest with you. I agree with Barry this morning. And I look at the percentage of our licensees that we never see, and I'm quite happy about that. But I'd still argue that the percentage of licensees that wind up in front of my board is too high. And how do we lower that number and raise the ethical compliance? That's your challenge. Thank you very much.